This is the All-Star Networking Show with your host, Cathy Paper.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Cathy Paper, and we're at the All-Star Networking Show. And joining me today is Melissa Boggs from Denver, Colorado. Super excited to have you today to talk about networking. Love you to tell the listeners what you're up to these days, and let's rock.
I love it. Hi, Cathy. Hi, listeners. My name is Melissa Boggs, and I am a keynote speaker. I'm a leadership coach. But most importantly, I help people move from being cautious to being courageous about their big ideas.
Ooh, I feel like you've just arrived on the show at just the right time for me because I have a big idea that I'm noodling with. But we're not going to talk about me. We're going to talk about, we can a little bit, but this is more about you how have you, I guess I'm curious, why don't we just start with, since you and I don't know each other, is how did you find this niche of courageous?
I have a very interesting story, actually. So, from a career perspective, I moved up through the tech world. I've always been on the people side of tech. And so I have been in the agile space as a scrum master, as an agile coach, eventually an enterprise level organizational coach. But what really changed the trajectory of my career was returning to roller skating when in the pandemic. So I skated all through high school, took about 20 years off, as many of us do, kind of forgot that skating existed. And then during the pandemic, I got back into it. First, I was skating outside, obviously, and then in the rink. And I was 40 years old, starting to skate again and starting to learn roller dance. So I do, everyone always asks if I do derby. It's not derby. It's essentially like hip hop style dancing on roller skating. And as a leadership coach, I'm going to tie the two together.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm wanting to add the visual for people because, I love this. Keep going.
Yeah. So, as a leadership coach, I had a specialization, which was in non-hierarchical organizations. And so I help leaders decentralize their authority and flatten their organization. So, going a lot less levels in your organization. And that is a very scary thing to do, because you, say, as the CEO, are still responsible for the entirety of the organization. And so I would work with these leaders to help them understand, like, what's the psychological, fear that you're dealing with? And then what are the logistical things that you are dealing with in order to decentralize that authority? And so as I started my skating journey and I started doing more difficult things, I realized that I was bumping up against some of the same things that these leaders that I was working with every day were bumping up against, right?
Yep.
Your brain is hardwired to protect you. Your brain wants to prevent you from doing something that might cause you to get hurt, whether that's physical and breaking a hip in my case, or, in their case, something going terribly wrong with their organization. And so, long story long, that led me down this path of building this keynote about how you go from cautious to curious, from curious to courageous, and from courageous to audacious when you're facing systemic change. And it was an incredible moment of, again, tying together the things that were so important to me professionally and personally. And it's such a universal thing. Like, everyone has some thing that they're facing, whether it's, I have this great idea and I want to do something about it, but I'm scared to, I want to learn this new trick on my roller skates.
Right. And do I have to get on roller skates if I'm working with you?
You don't, but I do. So this talk is an hour-long talk in most cases, and I have 4 choreography sets throughout the talk that are about 60 to 90 seconds a piece. And I'm essentially talking about the stage, talking about cautious, and then skating. And each one of my choreography sets demonstrates what I just talked about. And so
Great.
The first set is very, cautious and oh, I don't know if I can move. And each one, gets bigger and bigger. And it's been really cool because it not only demonstrates what I just talked about for different types of learners. But it also gives you something that you don't get in most talks, which is the ability to stop and integrate what I just said. So normally, like when you're plowing through a keynote, and I've had plenty of other keynotes,
Yeah.
you're just going. And in this case, you get as a audience member like a minute to just watch and also breathe and like, oh wow, like that applies to me or it doesn't apply to me or whatever it might be. So that was kind of honestly a byproduct. I didn't do that on purpose, but it's an amazing benefit. So anyway, I know we're talking about networking. And so when I was looking, when we started talking about doing the show, I was like, this is so applicable in networking.
Yes.
Like it's not just about your big idea. Like I am very introverted, which is hilarious, I know. I have a difficult time going into big group spaces where nobody knows me. And so I started thinking about how this applies, about how like my brain is protecting me from potential rejection in a networking situation. How do I move my brain into at least being curious, right?
Yes.
What are the questions I could ask myself to like help me at least get out of the fear space into what could I learn from this networking situation or, whatever it might be and so forth. So it was kind of a fun application I started thinking about this morning.
Oh, good. Because Melissa, again, I think you're to be doing what you're doing, you're an all-star networker, and to let people, I think everybody thinks it's easy for everybody. We
Mm,
make up that like, oh yeah, they're successful, they must be a great networker, and we all have to figure out our own style of networking. And actually, Kane, that is the episode before you, just said, they joke in his office that no is their second favorite answer. When you
ooh,
meet people, you get rejected. And I imagine, not having seen your keynote, but I imagine when somebody roller skates, you may fall down, right? When you're trying a new move and you pick yourself up, you take a deep breath, you wipe off and you keep going. So
100%.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I love the analogy of roller skating and networking, and probably people are playful. Again, I don't know your stages, but I think it is a great analogy because we all with networking, we kind of go, what should I dive in? And yet you want to do things. It's not always about you, it's that you want to do things. Um,
Right. For
so
me, like as I started, I've been a speaker in a keynote, but this particular talk is very vulnerable for me, right? It's very like personal to me, as well as I recognize that it's different. And different can be great, but I also have this like self-talk sometimes that people are going to think it's silly.
yeah.
And as I have started to have to network in order to, get this talk known and available, um, I I basically have to tell myself all the time, like, do not self-reject. Do not decide for them that, this isn't a good fit. Now there's some balance to that. Like I'm obviously, when I'm reaching out to different conferences or whatever, I'm doing my research and I'm making sure that I think it's a good fit. But there's still even the ones that I'm like, oh, I think this could be great, but what if they think it's silly? There's an amount of like regulating my own self-rejection. And it's very similar to walking into a crowded room and going, oh, they're not interested in talking to me. Oh, they're famous, whatever.
Right.
Um, when everyone puts their pants on the same way in the morning,
Yeah.
or most people do.
Yes. Yes. No, but this is why you're a good networker because you're doing it. You make a plan and what you just said, for people listening, you make sure it's a good fit for them. Like sort of using any strategic thinking with networking helps you we can only take so many rejections. So you've got to do a little culling of like, am I in the
Yes.
right place? Or what did I learn from this? And people are always surprised when I tell them, like, I get rejected a lot.
Mm.
But I've over the years figured out how do I sort of get the door open a little bit in the right places, or sometimes I'll find other people to bring in. Do you teach anything about roller skating in pairs? Or somehow when you said roller skate, all I could think of, Melissa, was I remember being at like a roller rink as a little kid, and you're clutching onto your girlfriend, or maybe they're doing the like snowball dance or something, and you're trying to get around, and then you both fall down. So I'm wondering.
Absolutely. It's funny that you say that because that is a long-term dream of mine. So I am a partner skater as well. So I do individual skating, and that is what is in the talk. But I also have like a roller skating partner, and we do essentially, if you could imagine, like swing dancing
Yeah,
on roller skates. So there's lifts and there's lots of spins and turns. And I definitely like, I can't take him everywhere I go every time I have a talk. But how do I build in this partner skating? Because that's a whole nother level of courage. Like that is a whole nother level of having trust in another human being and them having trust in you. And something that, my partner and I've had to develop over like a year and a half at this point. So I wish I could just take him to all my events,
right.
but I talk about it a little bit in the talk, just, in an abstract way. But um, it's the same thing though. It's like you have to recognize like what you're bringing to the table, what they're bringing to the table, and how do you bring those things together to like make something really cool in a safe way for both of you. And so more networking connections, because I feel like that's exactly what you're trying to do when you're reaching out to people, whether you're seeking a mentor or you're pitching a talk for an event, or you're wanting to promote a class. It's what do I bring to the table? What do they need or bring to the table? And how do we bring those things together?
Yeah, great, great. Do you do anything with your networking? You mentioned that you're more introverted. Do you find that you network more on screen, or you have preferences, or how would you help our listeners? Because we do have a lot of listeners that are introverted. And I even think since the pandemic, I'm more introverted in my networking. I don't love the big room. What tips do you have for people, or how do you do that online?
Well, online, I'm a little more courageous online, I will admit. Like we all talk about keyboard warriors. Like I can hide behind a keyboard and I can send, cold outreach emails all day long.
Mm.
I definitely have a bit more shyness when it comes to in person. But it's very circumstantial. And this is something I'm sort of learning for myself still. I can tell you that when I have given a keynote and I come off the stage and I am talking to, people in the audience who are sharing their stories, there's not an ounce of shyness that I feel in that moment. And I think it's just because like my purpose and their purpose in that moment is known, right? Like we know why we're talking to each other. There's not as much vulnerability in terms of like, why are you here? Um, but when it comes to like walking into a big group situation, tomorrow night I'm going to like a community social for an association in my local area. My number one tip is have a buddy. So I have a friend who we're not even in the same industry, but we have a shared audience, basically. And so we are going to this event together, and we are going to metaphorically, but not physically, hold hands as we walk in, like have a buddy.
Yes.
And that buddy can like not just have a sense of comfort because they're there, but there's a little bit of like, oh, I know that person and I can introduce you to them, and vice versa. I will tell you a funny story. When I first got back to skating, I went to the rink. I mainly skate indoors at roller rinks. We have tons of roller rinks in Denver.
Oh,
I went to
fun fact. I didn't know Denver was a top city for roller rinks.
It is surprisingly so. Like in the Denver metro area, I believe we have it's either 8 or 9 roller rinks.
Okay, I'm gonna look up how many there are in Minnesota, and for any of the listeners, put in your city and look up how many roller rinks there are, because you'll be
Oh,
doing keynotes in all these cities, so we want roller rinks. But anyway, sorry to
yes.
interrupt your story.
No, that is a thing I do. I love anytime I go, travel to do an event, I love going to their local rink and just soaking up the culture. Um, but I went to the rink, the same like two rinks. I go to adult nights so that, there's no kids there. The same two rinks for 9 months, seeing the same people every week. And I will confess, I'm kind of embarrassed to say this. I did not introduce myself to anyone. I
Oh,
was so shy. I just skated and like I smiled at people, but like I had such a hard time approaching people. And then a good friend of mine was like, "Oh, I haven't skated in a long time. I want to try it." So he starts coming. And I call him my emotional support extrovert because this,
like an emotional support dog. I love
yep,
this.
this dear friend went up to everyone, people I had seen in person for 9 months and had never spoken to. And he was like, "Hi, I am so and so. This is Melissa." And all of a sudden, within like 3 weeks, I knew everyone. And then it was quite funny because he kind of stopped going because he started another sport. And all of a sudden, like I have friends. He's not even there anymore. And I know people. And so it was quite funny that it wasn't until he started introducing me to people that I was like, wow, I have been here way too long to not know these people's names. So bring a buddy.
Bring a buddy. I love the bringing a buddy, and it's a great term, Melissa, of an emotional support extrovert,
Yes.
because it's almost like what my family does with me. They're my emotional support introvert, where will say to me, "Mom, stop talking," because I'll reach out and talk to so many people that they're like, "It's getting weird. Like you can't invite,
Ah.
all those people into our conversation." So I love that idea, the positive of it, of bring that buddy, and have what did you didn't say hold hands, but you said kind of virtual holding hands. And will you compare notes after the event tonight?
I'm sure we will. We hadn't discussed that, but yeah, I'm sure that we'll debrief and,
Okay,
who did you meet and whatever.
great. And I love that you said you're a keyboard warrior. You can do anything, because this might be where then I lean towards being if somebody called me right now and said, "Cathy, why don't you come to this event? There are going to be 25 people. Like there's one I'm going to tonight." But if I had to sit here and write 25 emails to people, it will take me a little bit more lift than just walking in the
Mm,
room. Um,
interesting. Yeah,
so,
I wonder if that's just, I mean, I'm very comfortable in writing.
yep.
And again, I'm comfortable in speaking on a stage. So, it's all about communication style then at the end of the day, right? Like where is your comfort level? Ooh, where do you feel that you are able to express yourself most clearly and in a way that you will be understood? Because I think at the end of the day, what we are afraid of when it comes to networking is being misunderstood. Whether that is, you know, my pitching this talk and people not understanding like what it's about, and then, me being afraid that people are going to think a certain way about it, or even how can I introduce myself in this social setting in such a way that like people understand who I am? I don't want to be misrepresented even by my own self.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I feel like I am much more able to do that in written form, in like a one-on-one situation. And it sounds like for you, like you can walk in and just talk to people and feel represented by yourself. And maybe it takes a little longer to feel that way when you write. So it's a pretty good little aha moment there.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a good one for me, the being misunderstood. Because I want to ask you one more question about kind of courageous and the brain. And you said that at the beginning. What do you encourage people to say to themselves if I'm nervous about networking and I don't even want to put my skates on, or I don't want to try that next move? Do you have any kind of coaching that we could give somebody that's afraid to network, that's listening? Um,
Absolutely. So again, the talk is like a 4-step framework. And so from cautious to from cautious to curious, I have little steps. And then from curious to courageous, I have like 3 or 4 steps, etc. So the number one thing when I talk to people about like moving out of the cautious space into the curious space is that you have to be willing to take up space. And you have to be willing to sort of navigate the situation to get enough information, and this is where the curious part comes, to let your brain relax, if that makes sense. Like the reason that I don't push people directly from, okay, you're cautious, but like just jump right into it and do that really hard spin or whatever, is your brain's not going to let you get there without having enough information for your brain to take a back seat. Because again, your brain is just protecting you. That's its job, and it goes all the way back to caveman times. And so you have to be willing to, like, the metaphor that I use is when we're working on like tricks at the roller rink, it's usually like in the center of the rink. And so I have to be willing to like go into the center of the rink where someone else maybe is working on the thing that I want to learn. And first just exist there. And some of us have a hard time like existing in, the center. And then be willing to ask questions. It doesn't mean you have to even try the thing yet, but just ask questions of yourself. And then if you're courageous enough, like ask questions of the person who's doing what it is that you want to do or some form of it. But there's, again, a certain amount of like taking up space and being perceived in that moment. So you can't really move into curious and asking questions without being willing to take up space and being willing to be perceived. And that's vulnerable, but it's a first step.
No, that's great. That's great. I'm thinking that's part of the letting your brain relax. One of the things I will say to people is I teach people how to juggle. I figure I can teach anyone how to juggle. I can teach anyone how to network. And what happens when you're juggling is people stop breathing. And
I can see that.
Because they're concentrating so hard and sometimes they're chasing balls and sometimes people laugh, but a lot of people, they sort of freeze and they stop breathing. And I just think that idea you have of letting your brain relax enough so that you can shift from that is just a great tip for people on this. So anything else you would add, Melissa? Because this has been so fascinating to think about. And one is, where do people find you? We'll put that in the show notes, but what's the best way for listeners to contact you if they want to hire you as a speaker, want to learn more about your services?
Sure. I mean, my website is melissaboggs.com. You can see my speaker reel there. And my email is melissa@melissaboggs.com. So I'm pretty easy to find.
Great.
And the last thing that I would say, and I think this applies to networking really well also, is that there's 2. I'm going to give you 2 quick tidbits. One is community. So that story that I told you about my emotional support extrovert really changed my journey from that point, because once people started to notice if I didn't show up, then I had to be more committed to my journey. And, people, like, we have such an amazing community in Denver where everyone else and what they're working on, and you cheer them on and you're like, oh, you did it. You finally did it. I'm so excited for you. So community is super important. It kind of ties back to bring a buddy, but like when you can, get 3 or 4 of you and you're like, we're all going to go to this event every month, this social event, this networking event, it just makes it easier. The other thing I talk about, and I borrowed this, but Second City, which is an improv troupe out of Chicago that many SNL people came from, they have what they call the third stage. And their third stage is their midnight show I think it's on a Sunday night, and it's free. And the audience is primarily college students. And Their third stage is when they try all of their new stuff. It is when they try the things that they don't know are going to work. And the reason that they do that is because it's free and it's college students. Like, you're in a safe place to take risks and be vulnerable. And so in the talk, I share that story and I say, the most important thing is like, what is your third stage? What is that first little place that you can try something that you want to do or network that is maybe a little less risky and a little less vulnerable? Maybe in the case of networking, you send an email to someone that you know through a mutual friend rather than a perfect stranger in order to like try out that language that you're using. Or if you're going to an event, you go to a 20-person event and not a 200-person event, so the most important thing to me about that is just like being deliberate, because if you do that, if you go to your third stage first and it goes well, then you have the confidence to go into the 200-person room or, send that email language to 30 people that are perfect strangers, because you've now convinced your brain once again that it can relax. That, hey, I've done this before. I survived. It went well. So now I'm going to go do it in a bigger way on a bigger scale.
Yes, great. Those are awesome tips for people. Really awesome tips. Thank you so much for being here today, Melissa. You were terrific, and I'm excited about the roller skating keynote and to investigate more, and appreciate you making time for people.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cathy.
Thanks for listening to the All-Star Networking Show with Cathy Paper. If you're interested in being a guest, please contact Cathy at www.rockpaperstar.com.